All right, welcome back to Dysregulated. As always, I'm Josh. I'm joined by Jeff and Vince. And today we're going to explore a little bit about generalized anxiety disorder. So, before we jump into the episode, tell me a little bit about what's been going on. How are you guys doing?
Been doing good. I mean, I feel like as we approach the, like holidays and things like that and get through them, a lot pops up in our world of mental health in terms of what we see, seeing a lot of different stuff pop up in the office, a lot of stress around the holidays, even though it's supposed to be a happy time. And, it's interesting to see people work through that, make it out the other side, hopefully get what they hoped out of it.
Yeah, we were thinking this was a great time to talk about anxiety. We tend to find that, right, that, like you said, the holidays are such an intense time. And, my wife is the kind of individual that feels more anxiety after she gets through the stress than she does beforehand. So we tend to see a lot of folks, in January. So we figured this would be a great time to get that podcast going in time for January.
Well, there we go.
There we go.
So, let's start here. Vince, I understand you have a definition prepared for us based off of our good old friend, the DSM-5. Now, for those of you who don't know, the DSM-5 is essentially a manual that's been built up over time that gives specific, well, maybe as we're going to talk about, not so specific definitions of mental health disorders. So you can find in there everything from, split personality to generalized anxiety and everything in between, right? So, Vince, what does generalized anxiety disorder, what does that mean according to the DSM-5?
Yeah, and I wrote it down and also to keep it simple, excess worry that's difficult to control, that impairs one's life. I mean, when you think about that, you go, have we not all had that experience at some point or another? And when they say they list a bunch of more specific symptoms like being on edge, being restless, experience of fatigue, irritability, loss of concentration or ability to focus, muscle tension, sleep issues. And all you have to have is 3 or more of those. So at any one point in time. And I honestly feel like, in observing certain assessments, we don't even ask, like, is that happening at the same time? Or I know that I make sure to ask, is it all happening at the same time? But if you just ask, have you experienced those things? And someone says yes, because they have at different points, you could fit them in the diagnostic box that is GAD, or the Generalized Anxiety Disorder,
Yeah. And in all fairness, we do want to say and recognize that anxiety is a significant issue.
Totally.
Not denying it, not, and yet I think our point that we're trying to make is in the DSM, the way that we categorize it, the way that it is described is so generic as to, I'm just going to go ahead and say, become almost unhelpful. We're trying to do something, right? I think kudos to the community for recognizing it. Kudos to the community for knowing that we need to address problems that are associated with ongoing worry, ongoing ruminative activity, the inability to fall asleep at night because I close my eyes and bam, my racing thoughts get going. I can't shut it down. I keep thinking about what that person said to me today. Can't let it go. Can't fall asleep. So really good stuff. And yet, I think what we want to look at right in this episode is how do we understand this concept of anxiety from a really good brain health perspective? What does it look like when we actually take a look at it from a brain perspective and not just this is our generic description of that experience?
You bring up a good point. I want to understand anxiety a little better. I think that would be really helpful to just set the definition of what anxiety is. And specifically, let's separate anxiety from an anxiety provoking environment, right? Experience. So give us a little bit of, we talked pre-show a little bit about, dissecting those, keeping those separate, because your anxiety isn't, it's not provoked by, just yourself, your brain saying, hey, I'm going to freak out on you. It's provoked by environmental factors. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, it's interesting because um, I like to, like, at least for our listeners, make things relatable through stories and personal accounts, right? And so I do want to come full circle to kind of define anxiety. Along the way, I want to quickly stop and touch on some stereotypes, right? Because that's how we've been taught to recognize it, right? And so people will tend to support what they think is anxiety based on what they've learned it to look like, right? But just briefly, like, I have never been an anxious person until I had extreme overwhelm and obligation when it came to raising a newborn, completing my master's, and working full time all at the same time. I developed a certain level of vigilance and on edge that then when the stressors left and I still felt the anxiety, I started to justify calling it generalized. The triggers are gone, but I'm still feeling it. I'm doing things that should help. Why is it not helping? Right. And so for me, that version of anxiety was very, very much so tied to hypervigilance and an aroused nervous system. Through the period of persistent stressors, somewhere along the lines, my brain learned you need to stay on or you're not going to get it all done. If you turn off, you're too tired to turn back on. Don't turn off. And it took 2+ years to shake it. It took a lot of creative things, in terms of choices and, certain faith-based aspects. There was a lot of things that were actually very helpful. But to me, it almost shows that it can be a combination of those environmental stressors, but then also what our brain learns in terms of how can I get through it.
And I like it. Now you're getting granular, right? The way that you define that was essentially by working through your own experience, describing some of the things that you've been through and how it feel, what it's like. Because Josh, when you said define generalized anxiety disorder, the first thing that came to my head was a quote from one of my all-time favorite movies, No Can Do, Gigantor. Night of the Museum, for those of you that haven't seen it. The reason I say that is I would tell you, and this is again my personal opinion, generalized anxiety disorder is one of the least effective of the diagnoses. I would tell you that if it's second to anything, it's second to ADHD, which we're going to talk about next time. Why do I say that? Well, generalized is a great way to categorize this. Because when we look at anxiety through an EEG lens, we know that there's at least 10 different biomarkers. I think we said this in one of our past podcasts. 10 different biomarkers. I'm going to put my cup down so go. And any one of them, if you have any one of those, completely different ways that the brain can dysregulate, and you will come up with the diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. So it's not helpful for me to say, what is anxiety? Because there's 10 different ways that the brain can normally dysregulate and come out with those kinds of symptoms, but every one of them is nuanced, it's different, and getting to the heart of it is crucial, in addition to anything that's like a non-regular kind of way, because the brain is unbelievably effective at making you feel stressed out.
It's a survival mechanism, right?
Yeah. And kind of to piggyback off of what Jeff said, like a generalization, like almost changes our way of aiming our shot, right? Like very, very much so. If you have someone who comes in with like social anxiety and agoraphobia, for example, we have a theme for where we can expect to find triggers. We can then create safe exposure. There is a way to treat that anxiety in talk-based therapy as well as neurofeedback, right? I have found that the generalized anxiety disorder clients are very, very treatment resistant, at least on a talk therapy level. Hard to identify triggers, low emotional awareness, and a lot of barriers to being able to address these feelings that they actually have a hard time describing the origin of.
I think that's a great point. A lot of times people can fall short in, and not to, disrespect anybody, but a lot of times it's just human nature to fall short in describing how we feel, right? I feel like that's a pretty normal thing that a lot of people experience. I don't feel like I can accurately represent how I'm feeling with my words, and actually that's a great thing of like, your martial arts therapy. Like, I think that's a great way to express how you're feeling and work through that sort of stuff. But what I want to dive into a little, what causes on an EEG level, what's causing anxiety? Because there's a difference. Well, I feel like how we're looking at it now is we're trying to fit, for lack of a better term, we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, right? We're trying to address this issue that is hard to describe if you don't know your way around it. It's hard to describe, and you're asking somebody, well, what's wrong? Well, I'm anxious. Okay. It's not very helpful. Well, I've been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. That's not super helpful. What are some ways that the EEG can help clarify that?
Mhm. Yeah, fundamental to all anxiety are going to be indicators in the central nervous system of over arousal. Um, when you ask the question of what are the symptoms that are associated with it, you're looking at over aroused frontal lobe function, such as I'm overthinking. How many folks out there struggle with racing thoughts? They can't get those ideas out of their head. Another aspect can be overactivation of sensory processing centers in the brain. One of the things that we'll talk about this evening is, I would tell you 4 or 5, I'll have to think through it, but a number of these are purely related to sensory processing over arousal. Now, think about that. If fundamentally your brain is exaggerating external stimulus, or if it is making your ability to perceive what you see and what you hear and what you touch, if all of those things are becoming distorted, well, then what good is talk-based counseling for that? And that's not to disparage talk-based counseling. And at the same point, we have to recognize, right, talk-based counseling is going to be very, very good at helping people to deal with things that may have to do with the acute stressors, right? I may have racing thoughts because I am dealing with a problem in my marriage. My husband or my wife is doing XYZ. We don't have enough money to pay the bills. My children are being oppositional and defiant. I'm not happy in my marriage. I'm thinking about all of these things. Well, great. Talk-based counseling is going to be very effective at helping a person to work through their relationship with their husband or their wife. It's going to help them to create boundaries. It's going to help them to cope with and deal with a lot of the circumstances that may be generating the stress. And at the same point, what happens if that's not working? What happens if you implement the boundaries? You have great communication patterns. You're the perfect parent that interacts with it's not going to happen, but you're interacting with your child in a very effective way. Let's frame it that way. And I'm still all the time feeling racing thoughts, over aroused. Well, maybe it's time that we take a look at your central nervous system.
Yeah, wouldn't it benefit anybody in that process of talk-based therapy? And this is coming from a therapist, to have an optimal brain to endeavor all of that, right? Because therapy is work, right? And I don't know if a lot of clients step into therapy recognizing the work they're going to do in their own healing process, but that's really what it's all about. You want to have an optimal brain to approach those tasks, and sometimes that's where the dead end happens. And any therapist that's listening, I encourage you to reflect and identify that moment or moments with a client where you go, I've pulled all the stops. I've used everything I know. We're still here. What is going on? That brings us back to, some of our results driven, talk in prior episodes, right? We want to get to the bottom of this, and calling it generalized doesn't help us do that. Biomarkers really help us hone in on the origin.
And Vince, I love this too, because you talking just stimulated some thoughts in my own mind. Even now I'm still like learning about the connections and how this works, but talking about it from the perspective of getting your brain in a healthy place so that it can manage the stressors of your life, right? We think about it from a fitness perspective, right? I'll even bring this into my own life. That there was a while when I was really struggling with back issues. And the solution ended up being, once I was able to get in a good place with my back, I started doing abdominal work, working out, right, the abs, making it strong in my core, and that transformed it so that now my back became healthy again. So the focus was on taking the core, making the core strong, getting healthy, and now my body could handle lifting. It could handle being in different positions and not twist out of alignment.
Yep.
And that's exactly what we're looking at, I think, with the central nervous system when it comes to handling stress and strain. That one of the primary problems with anxiety and stress is not that we don't, that we have to get rid of all of our stress. That's an unrealistic thing. Life is stressful. Life can be difficult. There's a lot of challenges that we have to deal with. And yet, what happens in our ability to manage stress if we're out of shape in the central nervous system versus well trained in the nervous system?
That's a great distinction, because a lot of times we kind of just think of, when we have an environmental stressor, right? We think of just, well, it's my response. I think what we're advocating for, to put it in a different way, there's not only how you cope with these stressors, there's also how your brain is interpreting these stressors. Talk-based therapy is really good at helping you to cope with what's going on, right? Troubles in your marriage, troubles with, something at work that's really stressful. That's all really well and good, but then your brain might be interpreting all this information at 11 and it's overwhelming. It might be interpreting it at a 1 out of 10. And that could be overwhelming because you're like, I don't understand what's going on. But at the end of the day, right, we want to make sure that your body's healthy and that you know how to handle the stress, especially when you're in a stressful stage of life, right? And your back example, I had in high school, right? I was playing soccer in high school, and I had I had a lot of pain in my back. You had a lot of pain in your back from a lot of different things, but we both had back pain. Your response to that was you had to strengthen your core. My response was my hamstrings were too tight, and it wasn't absorbing the impact, so my back was absorbing it, right? We both were having back pain, but in very different ways and different symptoms. And why I want to bring that up is because the QEEG and neuroanalysis specifically can help you to identify not only that you have back pain, right? Everybody has anxiety, everybody can have back pain, but it's hard to determine sometimes in the mental health world whether the problem's stemming from your core, whether it's stemming from your hamstrings, whether it's stemming from something else. And the neuroanalysis helps us do that. So that's a way that's something we want to dive into here, and helping people to understand is, right, not only does neurofeedback help this just in general, the diagnosis that neuroanalysis can help us work through and illuminate in somebody's life is so amazing.
I mean, Josh, I have such cool, little client vignettes, obviously respecting their confidentiality, to highlight stuff that you just said and stuff that Jeff just said, right? And also to fit the fact that a lot of times what you just pretty much alluded to is that what we're looking at does not have to be the beginning of it all, right? Like, how often is anxiety kind of second or third down the line? I think of that when I think of substance use issues too. It's like people will try to address the substance use, but it's but if the source of the issue is something else, we may return to this maladaptive means of coping with it, right? I have dealt with a client that came to us for anxiety and showed features in the brain of a hyperattunement to physical sensations, right? The anxiety, super resistant to treat in a traditional talk therapy method as far as providing coping skills, trying to reframe certain things. As soon as we start to heal the gut and we realize that there's a ton of inflammation in the gut that she has been hyperattuned to, all of those anxiety features and secondary kind of outcomes disappear. Another kid, anxiety, too anxious to sleep in a bed because of the texture of the sheets, can't dry off because the towel's too rough, too anxious, right? turns out we've got a ton of activity in that sensory processing area of the brain, and it was actually leading to beta spindling, where our brain tells us to move. So we were having a lot of issues in school, to the point where we were being pulled from school, right? But while we try to treat it as anxiety, nowhere. We get nowhere. We have people that are ready to give up on a 13-year-old, right? Like people in academia saying there's no answer to this, right? It's funny how some neurofeedback, a little bit of talking, and some boxing brought him right out of it. So there is a lot of misconceptions, whether it be that anxiety is just what we're here to deal with, or it's like, all right, no, what's behind it, right? Biomarkers are behind it.
That's a great way to put it. And I want to dive into this a little bit further, right? We've talked about these 10 different biomarkers that there are, and I want to explore some of those. Maybe some that we see pretty regularly, just so that the listeners at home have an idea of, right, we've said a couple different times, anxiety, is in all different shapes and sizes and different forms. What are some examples of different ways that biomarkers influence your brain to be anxious in different ways?
Yeah. I was just thinking before I jump into that,
Okay.
One of the things that I wanted to mention too is we focused a lot on the origin of anxiety being rooted in external stressors in our lives. There's a problem that's going on and I'm stressed out by it. I have a feeling that what I'm about to say is going to come as very good news for a lot of folks that are listening to our podcast. And the truth is simply this. Some people are born with, going back to the biomarker idea, literally electrical rhythms that are normative for them that will generate an internal awareness and experience of anxiety and stress quite apart from any external stressor. So what did I just say? Some people are born feeling anxious, that it's a part of the way their brain perceives the world, reacts and responds to external stimulus, where they feel anxious. And that's just the way genetically or how they're wired. Some other things, variables that we would look at that might contribute to that. But I can't tell you how many times I've had people come in and say, from the day I was born, as long as I can remember, I have always been anxious and I've never been able to talk it through. Here's the good news. The reason you've been anxious, probably, okay, very good chance, not going to say it's always this way, but there's a very good chance that it's related to this idea that your central nervous system is inherently, intrinsically overaroused. And those are the biomarkers that we can start looking
And
at.
to add on to that too, right? This is really interesting. We find that a lot of first responders oftentimes have that sort of brain type, right? First responders, somebody who's seeing, all these very messy scenes dealing with, whether it's police officers or firefighters or emergency room,
EMTs.
yeah, all of it. They a lot of times have this brain type, because I love this illustration you use, right? In this specific circumstance, imagine that like your brain's stress response is like you have to be above this threshold in order to reach it, right? Normal people, they operate down here. But these people that are like, super high, the anxiety is kind of how they live, how they do. They're like just below the threshold. So the jump that their body makes to get to the stress response is much easier than it is for somebody who acts at like a quote unquote like normal average level. So these people make really good first responders because they're used to it. Their brain, I think previous episode, their brain is a zombie apocalypse. Yes. All the time their brain is a zombie apocalypse, and when the zombie apocalypse actually hits, they're ready for it. So let's talk about, can we start with that one? Absolutely. What's a good biomarker that's associated with that?
So this is what we would call a low voltage, fast frequency phenotype. Phenotype essentially means that you have a genetic predisposition that is in fact shaped by environmental stressors. The the tendency of this individual's brain is to produce lower levels of voltage. Now, think of voltage, right? Power in the electrical current. You have to ramp that power up in order to deal with stressors. So these folks are always inherently at a disadvantage because they have to ramp up all the time. All the time, I got to work myself up. All the time, I've got to work extra hard. Now, I can relate to this on a physical level because, again, I'm 5'3". I am all the time having to work extra hard to reach things that somebody like Vince can just go, here you go. And I look at him and go, do you realize? Bingo. I got to jump up and down like a monkey. I got to ask for help. I got to get a chair, climb up on it. But for somebody that is equipped with height, they're able to just reach and grab it. Now, this is the same kind of principle as having low voltage. If you're not producing a lot of voltage, you've got to ramp it up on a regular basis to deal with and cope with stress. And so, like you said, this is how I describe them. Every day these folks wake up, their brain's immediately active. They're all of a sudden thinking about what's going on in this day, and I got to deal with all this kind of stuff, because what goes along with this is a whispering background that is, I got to do this all the time. I got to make sure I get this done, and then I got to do this, and then I got to do that, and then I got to, and it's always there. It's always over-roused. It's always thinking through what's got to be done, and it's always, I find, it tends to find that there's there's a goblin behind every door. There's a problem behind every potential situation. And so folks are going through the day all the time feeling consistently overwhelmed, consistently feeling life is out of control. And so everything for them is a crisis, which now you'll begin to realize that if everything in your life is a crisis, then a real crisis is just a day in the park. Yeah. It's the usual experience. So for a lot of these folks, right, I say this to some of those folks and they start laughing because I say, for you, there's almost no difference in terms of how much energy you have to expend to deal with your daughter who forgot to pack her lunch and got to school without it, versus I just found out that, my husband halfway cut his hand off with the circular saw. They still have to gear up for it. The whole world is overwhelmed. It's actually pretty funny. That's one of the things that is literally a genetic predisposition that individuals are born with. And when they're kind of stuck in this predisposition, the whole world is overwhelming. That's one way that we get this.
Yeah. And, kind of just putting the therapist hat back on, but I want to come back to biomarkers. The word congruence pops up for me. When things are incongruent, it's going to create some sort of stress. Now, that might not be obvious in the external environment, that I'm feeling misaligned with my purpose there, my interactions with others or that environment, right? So incongruence a lot of times can contextually lead to an internal struggle that nobody else sees. But as someone who, I remember being new to neurofeedback and the whole concept of biomarkers and being fascinated with it. And for me, I'm always, I'm quick to get anxious because I want to learn it all. I want to remember it all fast. And so for me, what really stood out was the kind of inverse relationship between alpha and beta waves, right? And I feel like letting the listeners in on just the fact that, like, we have a chill Zen wave. It's called alpha. We have an active computer is processing wave called beta. And when you think about an inverse relationship between the two, that essentially means if we don't have enough alpha, then we might have anxiety symptoms. Not might, we are going to, right? And they may look different than a brain that's experiencing high beta. Now, what if you have both? Right? So that means that your brain, high beta, you're going to be thinking even if there's nothing to think about. So chill moments for other people around you are not going to be chill for you, right? And if you have low alpha, right, like, you're not finding that zen in the moments that you could. It's almost like watching the chill moments go through your fingers and just moving your palm to catch the stressful ones. So biomarkers are fascinating. And once you start to learn that dialect, you understand a lot of the day-to-day differently.
And to paint a picture for you, right, a way that this is commonly applied in my life is when you have, or who has the relative on Thanksgiving that can't sit down until everything is taken care of. Everything's perfect. oh, the turkey's going to be done in 10 minutes. I have to make sure that the turkey doesn't like overcook and then it gets dry. And then, oh my gosh, everybody is going to freak out. They're not going to like the turkey. This could also be confused with some other because somebody might just think of, yeah, well, that's anxiety. I might have those thoughts sometimes. What's a biomarker that might get confused? Like symptomology might get confused with that, but under the surface, it's treated differently.
That's a good question. I think you're starting to move into the realm of something like OCD, right? So you've got like
I wanted
obsessive
to
thinking.
bring that up, but I wanted you to do it yourself.
So that, and you're referring specifically to that low voltage, fast frequency, that those folks that are always on high alert, always seeing risk, threat. And so there can develop an obsessiveness, like you said, with making sure that every threat has been addressed.
Control.
It is, yeah. So there's a lot of need to control the environment. So that's exactly right. An obsessive kind of a thing. I have to have everything perfect, but the biomarkers are completely different. OCD, and we'll hit this another day. There is one biomarker that basically just about everybody diagnosed with OCD will have. It's absolutely obvious to us. We can see it. And it's not the same as this. So this is where, and I like how you brought that up, because this brings us back to differentiation, specificity. We're able to look at the symptoms and understand the symptoms with detail and precision because we know how that brain works.
And there was a really, really heavy consideration in talking before we hopped on here about the difference between actual external stressing factors and one's internal propensity for anxiety, right? And I love when you brought this up, Josh, when you said interpretations. I'm such a big guy, maybe you'd say it's like an Adlerian approach to say, I think that like our sought after paths to significance at different points in our life lead to our expectations, hidden beliefs, and the ways that we interpret things that happen in the now and moving forward. And if we can tap into where those things might not be reality, right? Like, yeah, sure, our reality, but like what we've come to understand, if we look back on it, we can have a different look on that, right? And it really comes down to saying that like when you can get a look at someone's interpretations and expectations, you can start to see, well, why are these things stressful? And if it doesn't make sense there, it certainly will when you start to look at the biomarkers.
Yeah. Now, when we were looking at that fast frequency, low voltage phenotype, that's one of the styles of anxiety that would be considered an overwhelmed kind of a thing. The world is out of control, overwhelmed. There's two other ones. And I think, Vince, you would actually come up with a really nice, I'm going to put you on the spot, distinction between these two. There's another way in which people can feel overwhelmed, stress, anxious, okay, where one biomarker is the metronome of your brain is too fast. Or on the other hand, the metronome is too slow. What do I mean by that? Okay, so your brain has a pacer, right? That metronome keeps pace. It's supposed to be at 10 hertz. Don't ask me why. I don't exactly know. I just know that that's what it's supposed to be. And if it's too fast or if it's too slow, on average, we end up getting problems. Now, this thing can shift. It can go faster, can go slower. It's supposed to have some flexibility to it, but we want it to be at 10. That kind of represents the rate at which your brain inputs data. Okay, so what happens when it's going a little bit too fast? What if it's 11 or 12? Now your brain is bringing in more data than it's designed to handle. Think Lucille Ball on I Love Lucy, the episode where she's working at the chocolate factory. You guys all know this. Yeah. And it starts coming out. At first, it's slow. She's packaging it really well. And then it speeds up. She's like, oh, I can handle this. This is fine. And then it starts getting super fast. And that's the essence of the comedy. The moment is that she's now pocketing it, putting it in the pocket, eating them, all this. She can't keep up with it. She's overwhelmed because it's coming too fast and too strong. She can't keep up with it. That is one way that people can be overwhelmed. And that is linked to, in a lot of ways, trauma, Some people have it naturally a little bit on the faster side, but a lot of folks with PTSD are going to have a faster than normal background alpha speed because that's advantageous when you're being mauled by a polar bear. By the way, that's the example I always use. I don't know many people that have been mauled by a polar bear, so it's a little bit of a, thankfully, sorry for those of you who might be listening from the Arctic Circle. However, but it tends to keep it a little bit calmer when we're talking about trauma. But if you've experienced that, your background alpha speed goes up and stays up and you're locked. The other side of it is when that background alpha speed is too slow, when it's literally making a bottleneck for the information that's coming into your brain and you can't process it. Think I'm pouring oil into a funnel, and the opening from the oil container and the bottom of the funnel should be the same size, should allow for the free flow of liquid to transfer. But what happens if the bottom of the funnel is got a blockage or it's too small? Well, if you pour it too fast, it backs up, it backs up, and backs up. And also, that's it. I can't handle anymore, guys. That's it. Shutting down right now. Let it all seep in. And that's another area where we can experience overwhelm. If your background alpha speed, that metronome pace of your brain, slows down too much, then you're going to get overwhelmed with too much information. And that's the point at which you go, okay, I got to let it settle. I can't handle anymore. I'm going to shut down. I'm going to wait for it to go down. Okay.
You gotta take the oil out of the equation, right? And that can look like a bunch of different things. It could be, my wife and I, when we might get into a disagreement, she says, all right, I'm going to take a break because the oil has reached the top. She's like, I can't handle anymore. I'm going to take a break, let it settle, and then come back to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And this is an issue that affects a lot of, sorry, I don't want to cut you off here.
No, you didn't. That was a great example, Josh, by the way. I just like the real example you just gave for that. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah. Think about a kid that's in school. Everything that a child is being taught is data that's inputting. And that metronome needs to be able to manage the input that's coming at you. As you get older, right, you start hitting middle school, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, the level that is being poured into you just goes up and up and up. So the lower the background alpha speed for these students, the harder it becomes to keep up. This is actually something we'll probably hit on with the ADHD next time as well. But this has a lot to do with a child's ability or a student's ability to absorb information. And these are the ones that when they sit in a class, at some point they go, I just can't take any more. And if they have some kind of an accommodation to their educational supports, it will be more time.
Yeah.
Just give them more time and they do fine.
Absolutely. Right. Because you're accounting for whatever differential is happening in that background alpha speed. And, when Jeff brings up his examples, I love it. I love that example of the funnel because it's very visual for me. And it actually, for me, you really tied it up in a very pretty bow when you gave the example of, well, what would removing the oil actually be? It would be taking a step, creating 30 seconds of space to let it drain. Very, very real, because taking space is definitely an important element when people are at conflict and unable to find resolve and butt heads. The example with the background alpha speed that I've always thought of, and obviously you taught me this, I've got my guru right here, is looking at it in terms of like a sample rate for a photographer. So now if you hire a photographer for your wedding, let's picture a photographer. It's the same person, but let's picture him with fast background alpha versus low background alpha. So if we have someone who's literally camera happy, snapping pictures like a maniac, right? You might not have the best faith that they caught the right moments. They seem willy-nilly. They're all over the place, and they are running around thinking that they need to get it all, right? But then you have this other side of things where you have someone who seems spaced out. They're clicking haphazardly, and everyone at the wedding is coming up to them and saying, you're missing it. You just missed it. They just kissed over there. They're dancing out of it. You just missed the first dance. So they're constantly being berated for being behind. So there's a lot that can go on. Again, to me, there is a sweet spot. There is a balance. Shout out DBT and finding the middle ground. We got to find the right frequency. We've got to find congruence,
Now, one of the things too, I'm thinking, you want to share a little bit about some of your brain? because I'm thinking about it's actually possible to have both. And it's pretty rare, and it's an atypical presentation, but the reality is you could actually have a brain with both a low and a fast simultaneously, which we lovingly called a bifurcated alpha. There's not a test on this, don't worry. But you had the best explanation to me of this. You want to rock?
I'll take it away. So like when your alpha when it creates two frequencies like that are competing, I mean, there's a lot of cool metaphors to bring it to life. It's like, imagine an orchestra with two conductors at the same time. Imagine sitting between two radios. One is playing like ambient music, low jazz, and one it's like flashing scary news broadcasts, right? And you're sitting right between it and you're bouncing between the two. Well, where would something like that come from? Typically existing in periods of stress for a very long time, right? Like having to find chill amongst the stress because you can't stay elevated to the max all the time, right? Also, having to move from chill to absolute on alert and edge in an instant, right? Like having the lines blur so that ground is uncertain and you can't count on it. It's wild how our brain will adapt and say, okay, cool, I'll operate off too. And it was pretty interesting to see that in myself. What it leads to in me is that when times are chill, I look for things to make them not. I'm like, okay, if this is a chill time, I have to figure out what I'm behind on. There is something. There must be. And it's interesting now that I've become aware of that, I'm able to say, no. I have a tendency to be that way. I don't have. This is actually a calm time. And I can make intentional maneuvers to keep it that way.
And keep in mind, these are the stuff that we've been talking about. This is all sensory processing stuff. Mm-hmm. These are things that you can't talk your way out of, and frankly, you won't be able to medicate them. I would tell you effectively. Mm-hmm. Why? Because the underlying issue is dysregulation. It's a failure of your brain to maintain a healthy pattern of regulation for whatever reason. And good news is with things like neurofeedback, we can spot it, we can fix it. I mean, we can train that brain to shift those things. So sensory processing stuff, pretty fun.
We've had people that did that also, and as rare as it is, a couple people that did neurofeedback, and I like to call it unifying your alpha, right? Rather than just, maybe creating a more normative range. I like to call it, let's unify them. But there's been people that are like, I didn't know that this level of calm existed. I've literally had at least 3 people say, like, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was sedated because I've never been this calm in the face of the same stressors I've always had. And I'm like, whoa, well, your recent Q shows that you have one dominant alpha frequency now, and it's right in that sweet spot. So it's pretty amazing.
And neurofeedback's a great tool. There's another one that we use here at the office called Alpha Stim. And I remember that exact same feeling that you were just describing. I have major alpha deficits, and I put the Alpha Stim on, which basically it creates an alpha rhythm, right? And essentially, like, you put these little ear clips on, and it stimulates the alpha rhythm. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could be this calm. Yeah. It was crazy.
Yeah, going back to that one, my story to help people to understand what it means to have an alpha deficit form of generalized anxiety disorder. It's a brain that feels harassed and agitated and irritated even when you wake up in the morning and everything is puppies, kittens, rainbows, and Skittles. And the way that I explain it to folks, if you don't understand it, let's imagine that you're going to go to the beach in the summertime and you've been excited about it and all your besties are going to meet you there. You're going to the Big Wave Beach on Cape Cod. You wake up at 2:00 in the morning, you pack everything up, you do all the picnic stuff, get your car ready, jump in there. You got to drive 4 hours to get there. You arrive on site at 9:00 just as everything's opening, only to find out that everybody just blew you off. You're like, all right, that stinks. I'm here. I got all this stuff anyway. So I'm just going to have a good time anyway. So you grab everything, and because there's so much stuff, you got to take 3 trips. It's like a mile each direction. You get down, you get down there, you get everything set up. You sit down. The minute you sit down, all of a sudden the clouds roll in and it starts piddling rain on you. And you're like, dang, oh, well, I'm cold and wet. I may as well go boogie board because I'll be cold and wet in the Cape Cod surf. So you grab your boogie board, you get in there and realize that the reason the clouds came in and that the rain starts falling is because there's a storm offshore. It's ripping turbulence in the waves, smashing you down into the sand while you're trying to boogie board, getting scratched all over. You can barely get back up. How do you feel? Tell me how you feel.
Anybody else feeling overwhelmed?
That's an alpha deficit. And that's the way that you will feel just about all the time. You know what the crazy thing is about a lot of alpha deficits? They auto-stabilize. I've used that term before. Right, which means instead of giving in, I compensate the other way. And the crazy thing is a lot of alpha deficits end up being very optimistic, positive people because they've learned how to fight it. Yeah. It's crazy how that works. Now, part of the problem on this is the older you get, the harder it is to fight. So this is why I tell folks, if you feel like you have that kind of tendency, that sense of irritability, that agitation, I don't know how to feel chill. I don't know how to feel relaxed until I get that one glass of wine. And then all of a sudden I feel like the whole world feels better because guess what? A wine or an alcohol will give your brain, it will give you alpha rhythmicity. That's what it does as a psychotropic medication. Gives you alpha rhythmicity. So people that have alpha deficits would like to have a glass of wine to feel,
and that makes them prone to alcoholism too, right? Like it becomes, that sense of chill becomes addictive because it's such a radical difference. Which is again an application to, right, substance use. There's a lot of different ways as we explore some of these, let's call them avatars, right? As we explore some of these avatars of like what people come in and them for, you see these underlying factors that, does alcoholism run in your family? Does this, does a substance, does this specific substance run in your family because it makes you feel this certain way? And that's actually more addictive to you than it is to anybody else on the surface, right? This is some of the really cool stuff that neuroanalysis can show you, and these biomarkers can show you. I want to ask you, right? We're describing this beach, right? This beach adventure. I'm curious, what's like the opposite of that? What's somebody who, instead of like rolling with the punches, is just like, I'm going to stand here and take all of them. And I'm going to get punched in the face over and over and over again. It's going to make me tougher, and I'm just going to take it.
Yeah. Now that's a great switch over because now we can look at some of the other primary ways in which we might experience, anxiety. So far, we've talked about fast background alpha speed, slow background alpha speed, the metronome of your brain, alpha deficits, the lack of chill, the lack of zen. We've talked about the low voltage, fast frequency type. I'm overwhelmed in a world that's filled with zombie apocalyptic nightmares. A lot of the stuff that we can look at as well have to do with, for instance, beta excesses. Beta is the frequency in your brain that allows you to think high-end thoughts. It's cause and effect thinking. If your frontal lobes are a racetrack, betas are the race car. Our betas love frontal lobes, incredibly complex ability to process emotion, excuse me, and to deal with emotion. Despite everything that we see in the news, humans have an immense amount of control over their emotions, and that's all because of our ability to control and contain it based upon cause and effect thinking. Okay, if I get cut off by somebody as I'm driving down the road, and that person almost kills me, runs me off, I might get very angry and want to, pull out Mr. Digit Finger Puppet and say some colorful languaging. But I think about it and I say, no. Oh, wait, no, I don't want to get upset. I've got my child in the car. I want to be a good example. So I'm just going to take it. and I'm going to control it. That's all beta activity in that frontal region. So one of the major forms of anxiety is excess beta simply in that frontal region that's processing cause and effect. The characteristics of that individual are, number one, racing thoughts, rumination. I cannot believe what that girl said to me the other day. And I'm telling you right now, if she says it again, I'm going to get in her face. I'm going to tell her where she can go. I'm going to tell, and oh my gosh, I can't believe what that girl, do you know what that girl said to me the other day? That girl said something, it got me so, and it just cycles and you can't shut it off. It's stuck. And the other thing that tends to go with it is I'm working really hard to contain strong emotion. So if that's your brand of anxiety, racing thoughts, and intense emotion, well, you can try to talk about it a lot. But guess what happens when we endlessly cycle having excess beta in the frontal regions? If we endlessly cycle and talk about it, what are we going to do?
Keep it right up there.
Bingo, reinforce it.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a form where talk-based counseling, if you've got that ruminative type and you just want to talk about it, it ain't going to do nothing but reinforce what that girl said to me the other day and what I'm going to do when I get in her face and all the emotion.
That type likes the talk. They need the expression of it, but they don't also realize that it's just promoting the loop. You're just sharing it with somebody, you know?
Yeah. Reinforces it. So that's one of the big ones. And then we get, and we'll probably hit this one. I may save this for our episode on PTSD. We're going to be talking trauma. I believe it's 2 episodes from now, where we're going to look at the avatar or the kind of the general take when we're looking at biomarkers on somebody with trauma, what you're going to have. This is an area of very significant overlap with a PTSD brain. And this is where we've got overactivation in the parietal system. All going, whatever the heck that is. Parietal system integrates all of your senses. And when that thing is over aroused, the whole world becomes a caricature. The whole world, it's not sensory safe. It becomes sensory distressing. So these are individuals that have a difficult time going into a busy environment with lots of noise and lots of commotion. These are, frankly, if you see a teenager that likes to wear hoodies all the time, or somebody that keeps their hair long, they're almost definitely going to have excess beta over the parietal system. What are they trying to do? They're trying to,
from it.
yeah. So we see a lot of that stuff go on. And because it's a sensory processing issue, you're over exaggerating sensory data. I can't escape that.
And you can't talk your way out of that.
A lot of people don't know about this, guys, and a lot of people that parent young children, and we know that just, young children experience a lot of frustration based on not being able to express all that they feel or all that they know, right? Just verbally. But when you have a kid that says that, like, this is too much for me, and a parent says it's not, it really isn't. Like, look, it's really not that bad. They're not lying. Right? Like, if they have these sort of biomarkers showing up, they are actually experiencing it differently than you, the observer, if you don't have those same biomarkers. And that is a lot of times eye and ear opening for parents when they're like, wow, I'm going to observe things.
Yeah. And to highlight this, there are certain things that you will hand down to your children, right? There are certain biomarkers that you can hand down, hereditarily. Is that a word? I hope so.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, man. Yeah, that was a good one.
There are certain things you can pass down in your genes to your kids, but then there are also certain biomarkers that might be, shaped by your experiences. So just because you and your spouse don't experience it doesn't mean your kid won't. And just because you and your spouse do experience it, it's not a guarantee that they will experience it. Both of those are true. But yeah, I also wanted to highlight a lot of these things. A couple episodes we talked about ways that your brain can dysregulate. There's it's your brain's like too adaptive and it gets stuck. These are good examples of what it means for your brain to be stuck, right? This is your it could be hypervigilant, it could be your brain's interpreting information too fast, all these different ways. Your brain's stuck. Do you guys have any good examples of a way that your brain could cause you could experience anxiety through a what's the term, destabilization feature?
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel like I touched on it, but not as specifically to this topic in one of our earlier episodes in talking about the F2 beta spindles, right? Um, if I hear my 1-year-old trying to say words for the first time, my 5-year-old is trying to tell me about his day at school, I'm actually trying to pay attention to my wife because I want to hear about how her day was, and then the dog rings the bell to go outside. It might be that last noise that there is a very, very clear disruption, destabilization of my brain. It is an instantaneous experience of stress and anxiety, and I need a moment to remove myself from all of it, right? Before I interact with any of it. It's anxiety, but it hits like a train. It's not panic. It's an anxious rush, and you got to go. So that's almost like the betas becoming a firecracker, like Jeff put it. You know what I mean? So that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of a destabilizing anxiety to the fullest, right?
Yeah, you're right. And like you said, the vast majority, in my experience, of anxiety presentations are rooted in rigid features. Exactly like you said, your brain is stuck in levels of over arousal and lacks the ability or the resources to regulate differently. And so that's what we have to teach it how to do. You're absolutely right. A lot of the times, too, when we get any of the instability features, I would argue those are more of like, right, the atypical presentations where a person is, in a sense, auto stabilizing. Mm-hmm. Right, like the guy we talked about at one of our previous sessions, podcasts. He had a lot of anxiety, but when we looked at his brain kept zoning out. He couldn't stay focused, and it was freaking him out because all he wanted to do was do well at school. He was focusing hard. He's working hard, and by getting himself agitated and worked up, he could stay on task. So he was anxious precisely because of his brain's inability to maintain its own attentional networks.
Wow. And it's funny, just, it's something that, when we talk about avatars and talking about the different faces of something that we know is an issue in the mental health world, something like we're talking about today, like generalized anxiety, we like to pair our avatars with those biomarkers because we feel like we get a more personal version of these faces. Right? Because I think we can all relate to the stereotypical faces of anxiety, right? And I think back to, certain shows and sitcoms because that's what, we were fed, and we, learn about different elements of life. And you see David Spade on a sitcom in the 90s rushing around an office drinking Pepto-Bismol because, well, is that what an anxious guy looks like? Or you've got the nerdly kid in Saved by the Bell, hyperventilating into a paper bag. So we grew up thinking that that's anxiety. That's the mask that anxiety wears. It's no, it also wears the mask of anger, right? It can also wear the mask of isolation. It can wear a lot of different masks. There's a lot of different avatars there.
That's beautiful.
That's incredible. Well, hey, any closing thoughts from you guys on anxiety? Any thoughts you want to leave the listeners with?
I hope that something that we've said on this is going to resonate with one of our listeners. That when you hear us talk about different kinds of anxiety, maybe you related to something that we said today. Maybe you related to, I can't chillax. Maybe you relate to the rumination. Maybe you relate to, I feel overwhelmed all the time. Maybe you relate to just plain the fact that I can't go out in public and I can't stand going into busy places and having lots of people around me because I'm overwhelmed, and that makes me anxious. I mean, a lot of social anxiety is nothing more than sensory overload in social environments, and so they withdraw. And I hope that people that are listening are going to relate to this, and they're going to begin to experience a level of validation that they haven't had before. And one of the things that I want to say is every single time a person comes in, we're going to look at that person. Right. The way that we want to work with our clients is not to go in with a prefab thinking that you're going to fit into. Our job is to figure out what's going on with you. Who are you? How does your brain regulate? What are the circumstances of your life? What are the stressors that you're dealing with? And what are the symptoms that are emerging out of the confluence of all of these variables?
And then what can we do about it?
And then what do we do about it?
Yeah.
So that's what I want to say is that's why I don't like the term generalized anxiety disorder, because generalized anxiety doesn't, it's a bad way to explain how an individual is dealing with and wrestling with the complex circumstances of their lives that are being shaped and driven and molded by predispositions and how their brain processes data. Our job is not to simplify this. Our job is to understand it and then work with it. And we can. That's what I love. I love about what we do is when we take a look, right, man? We take a look. We were just talking about this the other day. Our favorite appointment is the third appointment. That's it, man. We go over the description and people's eyes open and they love it and they go, finally, that makes sense, right?
Mhm.
It's the best appointment ever when we call it a Queeg Eureka moment, right? QEEG, we explain the QEEG and they go, Eureka, this makes sense.
So yeah, I just like my closing statement is like Jeff said earlier, let's get granular. You know what I mean? We got granular with generalized anxiety disorder. We're about to tackle some other heavy hitters that, are well known in the field, and we're excited for it.
Yeah. Let's get granular about, how we're interacting with our kids, our spouse, our coworkers, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. That's amazing. Well, if you enjoyed the show, would you guys leave us a like, comment, share, subscribe? We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, all the different places you can find some more dysregulated content. So thank you guys very much for watching or listening wherever you are, and we'll see you again on the next episode.